13 years, dozens of shows, one hot horse, and a new horizon that I never saw coming. This is the journey that built me, from show jumping rounds to the world of racing. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and this is episode 2 of my new series, Full Hill Ride. Today's episode is already a little bit different because it's not so much on my recovery, or I'm obviously not back on a horse yet, so it's not so much on that, but more on my entire riding journey, whether that's the ups, the downs, or where we are today. I have had horses in my life since day one. My mum had horses when I was little, and I'd go up to the yard with her and watch her do everything, and like most horse obsessed kids, I was hooked from day one. I just loved them so much, even from such a young age. So then when I got to 4 years old, I started going to a riding school. I started learning all of the basics, whether that was riding, mucking out, any sort of stable care, any sort of horse care. I learned absolutely everything, and I was just so excited to be around horses. So I spent many years in the riding school just learning everything I could, and like I said, I just wanted to be with horses. It didn't matter even if I was just there to stroke one. I loved them so much, and that is a trending theme in my life. I love horses and I'd do anything to be around them. In 2018 I was just about to turn 10, and I learned absolutely everything I could at the riding school. I needed my own pony to progress more on. So for the past 2 years before then, I had been saving up every single bit of money I got. Every single birthday or Christmas. I'm pretty sure even Easter one year I said, I don't want chocolate, I just want money. And that says a lot because I love chocolate. Yeah, I saved money for quite a long time, and Mum had started to go and look at some without me knowing. I think it was probably more so that I didn't get my hopes up and then it not be right and then maybe upset. So she started looking at some, and there wasn't any that was like quite the right fit. And then I saw Piper's advert on a website, and I showed Mum and I said, I love this pony. And she was like, right, let me look at his advert. And he was just turned 5-year-old. He'd been backed and then sat in the field for months. And she was like, look, he's not what we're looking for. We want something that's experienced, knows its job, and I can get straight on and get confident and get out there and do everything that I wanted to do. After a little while, I managed to convince my mum to let me go and see him. And we went to go and see him, and he was absolutely horrible. In the first few minutes, he had tried to bite both me and my mum, and he had stood on my mum's foot. So it wasn't the best first impression on his behalf, but that didn't matter to me. We leave the field that he was at, and as soon as I get out the gate, I said to Mum, I was like, we need to buy him. And she was like, well, he's really not what we're looking for, and he's not very friendly. And so I was a little bit heartbroken. I was like, oh, okay, like really hoped that I'd get this horse. For like 2 weeks after then, I was constantly going on. I was like, can we get Piper? Have you thought about getting Piper yet? And my mum was like, look, Bailey, like, I don't know if it's gonna happen. And I had a pony magazine. I had a subscription for the pony magazines each month, and there was this book that came with one of them, and I remember reading it at school one day, and it was about a girl, and there was this pony that she really loved, but she couldn't get him, but someone managed to get him for her. And I was like, this is like me and Piper. And I said to Mum, I was like, look, I really want him. And she turned around to me and she was like, Bailey, I'm really sorry, but he's sold. We had a horse on loan at the time. It was for Mum. And so we'd gone to sort her out in the evening, and Mum said to me, oh, I've bought something off of the horse community on Facebook. I just need to go and pick it up, it's around the corner. And I said, oh, okay. And she tells me, oh, Bailey, you need to get out of the car, there's something you need to see. And so we walked down to the stables and Piper was there. And me being my silly 10-year-old self started crying because I thought that the lady who owned the yard who was there had bought him and he happened to be there. And I was like, oh my god, Piper's here! And my dad was with me as well and he said, no, Bailey, he's yours. That was the beginning of our journey. So as I mentioned, he wasn't particularly sweet. He was very obnoxious and he didn't know about personal space. Not in a nice way, it wasn't like he wanted hugs all the time. He was just kind of like, he knew about his personal space but not anyone else's, so he was like, no, this is my space. You know, like I said, I was little, he was my first proper pony and I just wanted to give him love and fuss. And he didn't want that. You try and cuddle him and he'd bite you. If you tried to pick his feet out, he'd try and kick you. He was just like, I don't know, like he almost felt angry, but he just felt unloved. You know, as I started doing more of him on the ground, he started to become much sweeter, and for the first few months of having him, we just hacked. We hacked everywhere, and that was basically his ridden work life. There was a few times where it felt like I had to almost relearn how to ride because, you know, I was on a horse who didn't know his job. He was really wobbly. He didn't know what he was doing. Luckily, I obviously had my wonderful mother there to support me, and she's worked with a lot of horses and a lot of young horses, so, you know, that made that part a bit easier. So he started schooling up and I started having lessons and stuff after a while. A lot of people doubted me and Piper. Like, they didn't doubt either of us individually, but together a lot of people doubted us and said, you know, it's stupid to get a kid, you know, out of the riding school onto a horse that knows nothing, and, you know, he's not going to be able to do this, and you won't be able to do this with him, and all of this. And it was really, like, defeating. I also knew that it didn't matter how much I achieved with him, I loved him, and, you know, that was all that mattered. So when we started jumping him at home, obviously they're like really teeny tiny cross poles, like hardly even off the floor. He really couldn't jump. I mean, don't get me wrong, when I was in the riding school and everything, I loved jumping. Like, I loved it so much. Yeah, his jumping wasn't very good. Obviously he was, you know, wobbly and weak and a baby, so he didn't know what he was doing. So no, I'll give him that, but it really wasn't brilliant. So a little while after, I moved to an eventing yard. My aim was to just get lots of lessons with the eventer who owned the yard, and like really get up his schooling, and then after that get his jumping up and, you know, get him going. He'd been there for 2 weeks and it was the middle of winter, the weather was awful, so the horses had to stay in. It was his first time going out in 2 weeks, he found it very exciting, and he had a bit of an exciting moment and he fell over and he injured his leg, which really destroyed my plans. Of course, he came first. You know, my plans mattered, but not more than his health. He had 6 months off of work, which felt like a really long time, and him on box rest, he honestly hates box rest so much. I know obviously most horses, or all horses would, but he gets really, really angry that he's cooped up in his stable. But after a while I was allowed to take him on in-hand walks, just like run the block, so it was like 15-20 minutes, and I had to do that for a very, very, very long time, but, you know, like I said, it didn't matter, just being with him and making sure that he was okay was my priority. Once he was fully recovered, back up and doing things, I started having my lessons on him again and getting his schooling up so that I could start jumping and doing everything more and better. And it was so tiring. you know, I'd never had to work with a young horse before, so I didn't know how long and how hard it was going to be. So after tons and tons and tons of training and a couple years of training, he started schooling really, really nicely, and his jumping, like, he suddenly clicked, and he was like, I know what I'm doing now, I've got this. So I moved yards and started having lessons with a different instructor, and she was absolutely brilliant. She literally pulled all of the work that I'd done with Piper, she pulled it all together, and that was kind of when me and Piper really, really, really clicked, I think. However, saying all this, there are parts of the story that I have missed out where, you know, he hasn't always been easy. You know, he would plant himself, he then, every time he asked for canter, he'd buck. And, you know, he wasn't easy. He was a stubborn little New Forest pony who didn't want to work, and that was that. He was happy with his, you know, little break off of riding. He could have done that for the rest of his life and he would have been very content. I think a true turning point for me was producing my own horse. You know, taking him from a very green, stubborn pony to a confident, willing to work, like loves his work, is one of the hardest but most rewarding things you could ever do as an equestrian. A world I never thought I would step into had to be racing. It started out as a curiosity, and then it became a whole new passion. You know, the speed, the adrenaline, you know, the fitness. It was something that I couldn't resist. Racing opened up a whole new chapter for me, and it was one where I felt truly inspired. And that's what I wanted to do as my career. I wanted to be a show jumper. However, I know that to be able to show jump professionally, you need money. I don't have that. My family we don't come from wealth, we don't come from money. So it was a much bigger challenge to have to face than someone with money, because they can much more easily go and just casually go and buy a horse that they need. Quite a few people on the yard also either had ex-racers or experience with racehorses. One of my closest friends on the yard, she had a lovely little ex-racer. He was very sweet. She also, when she was much younger, had worked with racehorses, and just she'd tell me all of these stories about her childhood with them, and, you know, the exciting parts, the challenges she had to face, and it just suddenly seemed really exciting. I don't come from a racing background. You know, my mum has always, you know, jumped and stuff, and like many years ago she worked on a dressage yard, so you know, I've never come from racing. I've never really, I don't know, been around it. You know, it's a pure, like, progression sort of career. Like, people at the racing school, you know, some people that go there have never even sat on a horse, not once in their life. They might have not even stroked one, and, you know, after their time at the college, they can confidently ride and exercise racehorses, and I just think that is such, like, a rewarding career. So when people ask me why did I switch from show jumping to racing, that is my answer. It's just such a new and exciting chapter for me, and one where I don't need to feel bad about the fact that I've not got the money to have, you know, the top horse or, you know, the latest, you know, gear. Like, I don't need to feel, you know, ashamed of the fact that I've turned up to the yard and, you know, I'm wearing my, you know, 2 years old riding tights and someone's turned up in the brand new, you know, Lemure collection or something, I don't know. I know obviously all horsey industries have, like, their little moments and toxic sort of parts, but racing, it's like, there's no judging on that side of it, and, you know, it doesn't matter if you have money, it doesn't matter if you don't have the top horse. It's a really rewarding career path, and it's exciting, and it's just something completely new. If my 13 years of riding has taught me anything at all, your journey will never look like how you expect it to. Whether you're producing your own horse or switching disciplines, you know, for a career or something professional, just trust that it all adds up. Thank you so much for coming back and watching episode 2 of Full Hill Ride. If anything in this video is something that you relate to, or anything like that, I would love to hear your story with your horse or your pony and the struggles you've had, because like I said in my last video, the equine industry always show the positives of riding, and it really isn't. Like, you know, maybe 75% of the time things are good, but you still have that 25% that, you know, there's, you know, pressure, maybe you had a fall or confidence knock, your horse is injured, you're injured, you know, there's always little negative things that are behind horses and the equine industry. I would love to hear your stories of maybe a horse you've produced, a horse you're working with, any of your successes, even if it's just a small one, you know, anything is a success. I hate to sound like every other YouTuber ever, but please don't forget to like and subscribe, and you can also press the little bell icon so that you don't miss the next episode of Full Hill Ride, because I'd love you to join me on my journey to getting back on a horse. Till next time.